Smarties, today we are continuing our trio of frequently asked question episodes. In episode 3 or 4, which aired last week, we tackled digital age questions. Today, we are digging into frequently asked parenting questions, like the balance between being involved and allowing autonomy for their learner, motivation, consequences, and micromanagement. Be sure to tune in next week where we attack frequently asked school-related questions in episode 306. Smarties, if you are interested in working with us, we invite you to sign up for a phone call. My practice is Kapp Educational Therapy Group located in Beverly Hills, California, nationally everywhere, and you can sign up for a phone call. We specialize in learners who have 5th grade through adulthood who struggle with executive functioning skills challenges. Our website is www.kappedtherapy.com. That's Kapp with a K and 2 P's. Steph's practice does all of the things. Her practice is located in Manhattan Beach, California, and Redondo Beach, California, and virtually everywhere. Her website is www.myedtherapist.com. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 305 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And today we are talking about parenting questions.
So last week we dug into, we're doing this 3-episode
trilogy,
if you will, of frequently asked questions, and we've divided it into these 3 themes. And so last week we talked about digital age questions, and then this week we're chatting about parenting questions, and then next week we'll talk about school-related questions. So Steph, do you want to just get started and dig in?
Yeah.
So we got these questions from our team and from parents. So the ratio of criticism to affirmation or positive acknowledgement. Affirmation is a lovely word. Positive acknowledgement is 2 lovely words, but I'm not loving the word criticism. Mm-hmm. So let's replace that with productive feedback, shall we say. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Steph, I feel like I have a rule of thumb for this, but what's your initial response about how to balance that out?
I don't know that I have a specific
formula.
Yeah, I do think that it should be sandwiched. So something positive, then something productive, then something positive. Mm-hmm. I think it depends on also what it is.
I agree. Productive comments are only productive when there's been sort of previous agreement about something that is a focus, and previous expectation has been set that this is like something we're focusing on. If you were wondering if you're being critical or you need to kind of err on the positive side, then that's the balance that like we all have to sort of strike, both as clinicians working with the learners that we work with and parents working with our kids. Steph, what would you add?
You know, this goes back to the one thing at a time.
Yeah. Should we rename the podcast One Thing at a Time and Everything in One Place?
Yeah, seriously. That's so funny. It makes me think back to, it was like our very first speaking engagement together. And we did that exercise with parents of all the things that they wanted to work on with their learner. And they were coming up with, and what they were trying to work on currently. And they were coming up with a dozen things at once. And I remember us sitting there saying, whoa, slow down. What is the thing that is going to have the biggest impact with the smallest adjustment? Mm-hmm. Starting there. And what is the thing that is bothering you? Because is it triggering to you, and why? Like really being thoughtful about why you need to have this productive struggle or productive suggestion or whatever you want to call it. Where is it coming from? Because, you know, sometimes I've had conversations with parents, you know, how a learner tackles something. And there's the identifying parent who says, oh, that's how I did it as a kid. And then there's the other parent who says, my brain doesn't work like that. Why are they handling it in that way? that might be the way that actually works for them. Listen, I'm not saying that anything's perfect and there couldn't be changes made, but for the most part, if they're figuring out something that is working well, why could it be triggering you?
Yeah.
To reiterate, being thoughtful about what it is that you are feeling the need to have a conversation about and what is the outcome that you're really looking for.
I love this because I actually think it sort of seamlessly piggybacks into the next question is when to back off when a child is escalated. And it's not so much about backing off, but it's about staying present when the learner is escalated. And so what that means is if a break needs to be had, a break needs to be had, but letting the learner know that you are there and you are present and you're engaged with them. And some kids will need a quiet space. Some kids will need physical distance from you to sort of re-regulate. And some kids need actually the opposite. And they need touch and engagement and containment. And so that's a question about knowing your child. That's a question about also understanding the long term versus the short term. And also understanding that when the learner is escalated, heightened, triggered, agitated, productive engagement is unlikely. And we have to sort of go to like the primal and help them through that primal emotion.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's take an example because this seems to happen often. A student that has front and back math work, a lot of problems, and they've gotten through some of them and the meltdown has begun. It's just escalating because they can't get through it anymore. So I think there's two parts to this. There's the part of helping them figure out how to re-regulate. And there's also the part of sometimes it just needs to be done. That's where you say to the teacher, we did the best we could. They spent so many minutes on this. Also, is it developmentally appropriate how long they're spending on something? 2 hours for a second grader for homework is not appropriate. Hopefully you have a teacher that is understanding, but sometimes you got to take the hit. And I've had, unfortunately, experiences with some teachers that don't want to make adjustments or change things, and kid might get a bad grade, and that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so let's look at the next question.
Yeah.
Administering consequences. So administering consequences for a child when appeal of original reward is no longer relevant. I think that's a lot to break down.
We wish there were better answers, by the way, Smarties. Like, we wish there was like this is what you do in X, Y, and Z. And by the way, as someone who likes rules and like being told what to do, that's why like I'm so susceptible to like an online course. We got the online course for sleep and we got like the online course for potty training. Why? Because I like rules. I also think it helps facilitate consistency between Adam and I.
Yeah.
For parenting.
Yeah.
That's why I shared in a previous episode, like, we don't have rules about the TV yet. Like, we're figuring out that screen time for our kids. So, like,
For sure.
that creates its own challenges. But, Steph, what's your initial sort of consequences versus reward versus the reward is no longer relevant, which always makes me laugh.
Yeah. Well, I think that happens a lot. So there's so many different variables as well, because how old does the child have ADHD or not? Are they capable at looking down the road, right? So a child who, you know, if they do all their homework for 4 weeks, they get XYZ reward. That is so abstract with time that is probably not going to work. So I think you really have to look at what works for your child, right? So we've heard many people talk about how, you know, when they do something good or they do well at something or try their hardest or whatever it is, whatever expectations you set up, you could have one of those envelopes where they could pick out an envelope and, you know, they'll get something if they do whatever they're supposed to do and they don't know what it is. It's blind, so to speak, or having points or having, you know, whatever it is. Unfortunately, for a lot of parents, some kids don't care about any of those things. And you need to find what their currency is. And unfortunately, for a lot of kids, it's screen time.
Yeah. And that's something to examine. They should be desirous of something. And sort of navigating that and figuring it out. And maybe it means you withhold something you intended to give. That's something that parents have to sort of examine as well.
Yeah.
Next question is, how do we find a kid's inherent motivation? And what if it's not school? Let's start the what if it's not school? It may not be. So we have to have like an understanding. Okay, so let's start from the baseline belief that Steph and I both share, which is when kids can, they will. And when they're not, why are they not? And let's get curious about it, which for this question really interprets to kids are inherently motivated and they want to please the adults in their life. And generally that's shown off through school. What happens with kids who have a lot of unsuccess around learning and around school is they start to realize I'm not good at it, and therefore I'm going to emotionally disconnect from it. And the way that that looks is that's apathy. That can be antagonism towards school and learning. But what it is it's a lack of motivation and engagement because it's not something that feels good to them. So what do we do?
Well said. I think it depends also on if they find something outside of school to help with that inherent motivation. Are they good at a sport? Do they enjoy something? Do they like music? Do they like whatever it is? That can help tremendously. But for kids where school is hard, really take a step back for a second and think about if you had a job that you hated and you didn't get paid for it, would you want to go and do it all day, every day?
And you weren't good at it.
Yeah. Would you want to go do that? No. So I think that there's this common misconception that school should just be motivating enough. And it's not.
For our population, it's generally not.
Yeah. And how many adults have you spoken to that said, school was really hard for me. I didn't do well. I didn't like it. So many. I'm in, social situations all the time where that happens.
Always. That's why we're always like, where were you when I was a kid? The reason people are asking us is because the motivation was there. The desire to do well was there. The desire to please and be successful was there. And so that's why we get asked that all the time.
100%. This is where you got to get curious about your kid and seek help from a clinician, a therapist, somebody who can help make things easier.
So the next question is, we are trying to be more hands-off and not micromanage, insert student's name here, but would still like to support them in their growth. What would you say are the best ways we can do this? So we actually just recorded episode 303, which is directly around this question of what are the things that parents can both do in between session and allow our learners to sort of take a step forward and not micromanage their academic experience. And we'll go ahead and link episode 303 in this episode as well. 3 questions that parents can ask their learners that will support their learners in between sessions and allow them to take a step forward towards autonomy, allowing you to take a step back is, did you fully go through your online portal? Is your calendar fully reflective of what's happening or what's happened? And what's on your agenda today? Those are simple ways that you can still show engagement. You don't necessarily have to believe what your learner is telling you, so you can have the understanding that they have to do that with you. Those are your starting off point of being more hands-off and micromanaging less. And then the other thing that I would add is be open to iteration on this. Having an educational therapist on our team or a clinician on our teams are a really great way to sort of facilitate that transition for parents, but also
Agreed.
Being open to the fact that like kids may have to fail forward in order to show that sort of growth that we really want from them. And that recovery from a failure is really important here.
Really, it's such a growing moment. I want to say, how old is the child, right? Is the child in elementary school, let's say 4th, 5th grade, and you are checking and correcting their homework? That is one of those moments where it's time to start being hands off and letting the homework go back to school so that the teacher knows and can get feedback about how things are going in real time, right? But then you have a high school student going into a portal and looking at assignments every day, and it causes extreme tension in your family asking, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? It can be very detrimental to the parent-child relationship as well. So this is where having an ed therapist is wonderful to help with helping you support, but from afar.
This plays into the next question too, which is what is the appropriate amount of support to provide as a parent? It's individual. We want to get our learners to a place of productive struggle where they're making growth and it's uncomfortable, but manageable. Mm-hmm. And it's individual. So sort of having that third party and being clear with your kid and yourselves on what the goal is and why is really critical in this whole process.
Well, I was going to say also, the whole thing is that we're trying to teach them how to hold themselves up. And they're not always going to be able to, and they're going to fall. And that's okay. They need to, because they need to learn how to pick themselves back up. So the last question is, when a child does not respond well to reminders that are verbal, for instance, but need those verbal reminders, how do you de-escalate and support accountability and self-regulation? So this is a tough one because let's take a step back. They don't respond well to the verbal reminders because when are they coming? Are they coming at a time when they're engaged in something else and they can't split their focus? Is it coming at a time when they're working towards it already? It might not appear that they're working toward it. It's sort of gauging where and why the reaction is happening. And if verbal reminders just in general are triggering, then perhaps a list. And I think if you know that it's going to escalate, finding a way to do it in a way that is not going to escalate it to begin with is going to be your best bet.
This is why we always talk about coming up with a plan for the thing that's irritating to our kids. So that's why we are promoting those 3 questions. Getting agreement about what's going to happen before it's going to happen can be really, really helpful because you have to still have your needs met. You still have to make sure you're parenting and make sure you're staying engaged with what's going on for your learners. So our teenagers want to totally hands off, just let me handle it. But we don't feel that they're ready or they're not showing signs that they're handling it.
Yeah.
So that's where you have to have that negotiation, that agreement with your learner of saying, look, I'm just not going to not ask you. And so what's the plan?
And helping them reflect on what works best for them. Is it going to be a big download when they get home from school about what they're going to do and when they're going to do it? Is it a check-in before they go to bed? What did you do? What did you not do? Those kinds of things. So get creative with it because I think there's a lot of ways to do this so that it doesn't become escalated.
All right. So we really dug into a lot of these sort of parenting questions today. We wish there was a formula. We wish we could just say, here's X and Y, it'll get you Z. We're all doing the best we sort of can to navigate all this, but incremental growth and long-term growth is what we're going for. Mm-hmm. And that might look differently than what you initially wanted, but we always talk about that staircase. You're at the bottom of the staircase. How do you get to that top landing?
One step at a time.
One step at a time, and where are those small wins along the way?
Exactly.
So we're here with you.
Yeah.
We're happy to connect with you. Sign up for a phone call, and we'll talk again next week, Smarties, about school-related questions in our final episode of our triad, trilogy, if you will, frequently asked questions. Have a great week.
Have a great week.